Hello, everybody. You're listening to Crunch Squad. It's a podcast within a podcast where we discuss the rules, the mechanics, and the number crunching behind this colossal game of Dungeons and Dragons. I'm Ned Wilcock, your host and... No, that's the improv tabletop thing. I'm not the GM. I'm just the host of Crunch Squad. That's what I do around here. Today, I'm joined by...
Mickey, and I play Ignis in our Season 2 campaign of The Skulls and Shackles. And I am playing a fighter in that campaign.
Yeah, we were talking behind the scenes about, have we really not done a Crunch Squad for the fighter yet? Turns out, we haven't. But now we have a very good excuse to talk about the fighter, which is what we're going to do today. Wouldn't it be wild if we were doing something other than discussing the fighter after that introduction?
So, clerics.
Yes, so holy. Rolterra, Ignis is very religious.
So holy, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, let's just start right at the beginning. The fighter is a pretty simple base class. It's a real good one, especially for new people coming into the game. But it's where when you get into the subclasses, there's still a lot of meat, even for the more experienced players, to dig their teeth into. But just starting here with some of the basic class features, this is one of 3 D10 hit dice classes in the game. You got your ranger, you got your paladin, and you've got your fighter. So they can take a pretty big hit, and proficiencies, they're fighters. They're good with everything that you can fight with. All armor, all shields, all weapons, no tools. Your tools are your weapons, the tools of death and destruction.
You got those dexterous fingers.
Yes. And you got your saving throws in strength and constitution, very on brand. And there is some variation in terms of skills from acrobatics, animal handling, athletics, history, insight, intimidation, perception, and survival. History is an interesting one for the fighter to have, but it's cool that it's there. And then some pretty straightforward equipment that you get to start out with. Lots of weapons. Lots of good armor and lots of good weapons that you can choose from. Be very, very well armed, even from the very beginning as a fighter.
The next thing as you're building your fighter is that you're going to build your fighting style. And one of the reasons that I like the fighter, and I think it's a great, first of all, just a beginner class, but also what's fun for more experienced players, is I feel like this is really where you start building, what kind of fighter you want to play. Later on, you kind of start at this stage, and it starts so early in fighters. Level 1, choose a fighting style. And there's so many different kinds, not just even in our player's handbook, which is what we're looking at specifically right now, but if you're going into other material, let alone third-party material, the fighter has a lot of fighting styles, and that will really set up what kind of character you're wanting to play and what kind of fighter you want to be. So as you're looking at subclasses and other things, it really starts for a fighter with your fighting style. Archery, you gain a +2 to your attack rolls. So if you're wanting to play an archer, that would be a great one. I love the idea of the dueling, that if you're wielding a melee weapon in one hand and no other weapons, you gain a +2 to your damage roll. So you're like a duelist with your rapier, that you're able to gain a bonus to it because you're only using one-handed. So a lot of things that I feel like you take as a negative to yourself actually becomes a benefit for a fighter. Your protection, when a creature you can see attacks a target other than you within 5 feet of you, you can use your reaction to oppose disadvantage on the attack roll. If you're, especially, you have to be wielding a shield, but you can throw that shield out in front of them. So it really, whatever kind of fighter you're wanting to be and to build eventually into your subclass starts at level 1 with your fighting style. So if you're building a fighter, look at the fighting styles in the player's handbook and in Tasha's and in Xanathar's and in the third party, because there's so many out there and they really help build a base for your fighter to eventually be.
Yeah, one thing we should probably mention as well is these are the 2014 rules for the fighter.
Correct.
Because those are the rules that we're using for this campaign.
Yes.
There are more fighting styles available in the 2024 rules. What fighting style does Ignis have, by the way?
Ignis has one from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It's called Unarmed Fighting. Unarmed strikes are a 1d6 plus strength, as long as you don't have any weapons on you. Or sorry, it's a 1d8 plus strength, But if you don't have any weapons or a shield, your hits become a D8 plus your strength. And then at the start of your turn, you can deal an extra D4 to a creature that is grappled by you so that you can do extra damage. I took that to then Thomas and I said, hey, could we maybe use a monk's ruling with this? Because I wanted to build a dexterous character instead of strength. So maybe instead of hitting really hard, you hit multiple times, you hit at just the right spot. And so he was willing to bend that rule a little bit for me. But yeah, mine's in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It's not even in the player's handbook.
So there's all kinds of options out there.
Yes.
Next thing we're looking at is the Second Wind, which is really great for such a martial-oriented character, somebody who's going to be in the front lines. They have this well of stamina within themselves that they can draw on. So on your turn, you can use a bonus action to regain hit points equal to 1d10 plus your fighter level, and you can do that once per short rest.
At a second level, you gain what's called an action surge, which is one of my favorite abilities of being a fighter. Starting at level 2, you can push yourself past beyond your normal limits for a moment. So on your turn, you can take one additional action on top of your regular action and possible bonus action. So once you get into higher levels with extra attacks and such, which if you've listened to Ignis, I do quite often. I don't love that it's only like once, but when you need it, it comes in clutch to just push yourself just a little bit harder and get that extra action. You can't use it again unless you finish a long or short rest. However, starting at level 17, if you ever get that far in a campaign, you can use it twice before a rest.
Yeah, so like theoretically, if you do get up to level 17 by that point, you've got 3 attacks with your extra attack, and if you use your action surge twice, that is 9 attacks that you can do in one turn. Though, can you use action surge
only once per same turn? Yep. You can only use it once on the same turn so that you don't have 9 attacks in one turn. It does specify it, but you can use it twice between a long or short rest. But it is nice to get it back after just a short rest.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing where, like, as soon as it came out of my mouth, it's like, that's too overpowered. That cannot be how it works.
That doesn't feel right.
Let's see. The next thing, well, you get your subclass, your martial archetype starting at 3rd level. There's lots of good options out there. We will be talking about the Echo Knight in a later Crunch Squad. But the next thing to mention is the ability score improvement, which this is something that all classes get, but the fighter gets 7 ability score improvements as opposed to the 5 that I think every other class gets.
Sure. I believe you. That sounds right.
Yeah, so you're just beefing yourself up even more, getting even more feats. So in that way, it can be another way to customize your fighter a little bit more if you want to grab certain feats like Tavern Brawler or like Grappler, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Our next level up, we're getting into level 5. You gain your extra attack. You can attack twice instead of once whenever you take the attack action on your turn. The number of attacks increases to 3 when you reach 11 and to 4, if you ever got, to level 20 in this class. I'm not bitter about it, don't worry.
Yeah, well, maybe one day. Maybe
one day we'll get that far.
But yeah, even just like the 1 extra attack is great. 2 extra attacks, even better. I mean, you got people over here like Ataraxia who, even at level 20, gets to attack once per turn. So, being able to have that extra punch from the extra attacks, super nice.
Oh yeah, I don't knock it at all.
Then getting up to 9th level, we get something called Indomitable. This allows you to re-roll a saving throw that you have failed. And if you do that, you have to use the new roll. You don't get to choose between the two. And you can only do that once per long rest until you reach level 13, when you can do it twice per long rest. And 17th level, you can do it 3 times per long rest.
I think one of the interesting things about the fighter, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ned, that I find really interesting is most base classes will have something at like the same similar increasing at like level 3, level 5, level 9, and then like 13, maybe 15, 17, and 20. But I feel like the fighter kind of stops after level 9, and then from there you're just increasing what you already have, which I think is really helpful for new players, because when you have those other ones, you like forget about abilities. But when you're playing a fighter, you really learn your ability, and it really lives within your character. So you might get more attacks, or you get more ability scores, or a new feat to keep control of. But a lot of the base class of the fighter starts early on, and it stays with you, which makes it easier if you're able to get into those higher level campaigns, or if you're going to run a high level campaign. I know I've played games where we just like started at level 17 just for kicks and giggles. This is a great one for those, just because so many of those are just expansions of those lower level features.
Yeah, that's something that, we do see repeated in a few different classes, but is especially strong in the fighter, I think, because at this point, we've discussed all of the base class features of the fighter, but that is the progression that as you keep going, your action surge, it just keeps getting better. Right. Your extra attack just keeps betting. Your indomitable just keeps getting better as you keep leveling up and leveling up.
I think that feeds into, if you're choosing a fighter, for me, I really like to do, if anybody knows this about me, it's a well-kept secret, that I love the backstory of characters. I love building a character based on things. And I think a fighter really allows for that because it feels like you're progressing on your skills. The things that you're learning, you're just getting better at. That you're not learning new spells out of nowhere. You're not learning new abilities kind of out of nowhere. I feel like there really is, if you're interested in that aspect of the storytelling of Dungeons and Dragons, and not everybody is, and that's totally fine. But if you're interested in the storytelling, I think there is a freedom for that. And one of the things that I've been looking at a lot with the extra attack is what constitutes an attack. What needs an attack roll?
Yeah.
Something we've been getting into a lot in this game is I just found out disarm is an attack roll. So
yeah.
That uses one of the attacks and not both of the attacks. And so not limiting yourself to just, oh, well, they're a fighter, therefore they punch hard. Like my specific Echo Knight, I have a lot of story elements to it and a lot of flavor that's added to it. And with the base class of how can I use these features the best to tell a story, not just, oh, well, you hit 5 times, there's the damage, and we move on. Because I like the story. If you just want to hit things and hit them hard, this is also a great class for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of range here, because like we've mentioned a couple times that this is a really good class for beginners. And in fact, like the champion martial archetype for the fighter, it's like, if you want to play just the simplest, most straightforward mechanically character in the game, play a champion fighter.
Yeah.
Because you just get improved critical hits. Like by the time you get to the higher levels with a champion, you get a critical hit on levels 18 through 20. And there's various other bonuses that come with that. But then on the other side of things, I feel like in Skull and Shackles in Campaign 2, we've had more let's pause and consult the rulebook moments for Ignis than for any other character that we have in the party.
Accurate.
For the fighter.
Yeah.
So I guess what would be, a lot of us more experienced players might look at the fighter and be like, that's the simple class. I want something that has a little bit more meat for me to chew on. What would be maybe your pitch to the other experienced players to say, no, maybe give the fighter a chance?
I think very similar to what I was saying earlier with the fighting style and with the martial archetype, that there's just so much that's not even in the player's handbook. So much from third parties, so much from Tasha's and Xanathar's and other official D&D things, and even an element of, I've kind of homebrewed the Echo Knight, even though the Echo Knight comes from a official source. Thomas has really allowed me to broaden that. And so I've been really surprised that as a player that I've been playing for nearly a decade, both seasons of this campaign, I chose kind of those base class classes. That's a dumb thing to say. But the base class classes one was a barbarian and one was a fighter. And I have found such extraordinary range with that and been so delighted in the mechanics seem basic, but for me, that makes me feel like that allows me more freedom to tell the story with it. That allows for more flavor within what you're doing, because it is kind of, for me, boring to say, I hit them twice with my sword, and I guess that's the end of my turn. Thomas has really allowed me to start stepping in with more storytelling and more flavor with the character and how my hits look and even how the misses look. We've kind of started moving into that where if it doesn't hit me, well, this is how it doesn't hit me. And I think the simplicity of the fighting style of the fighter has allowed me to be more storytelling with it, where I think sometimes other more mechanically minded ones, like the wizard or a sorcerer that have more numbers and rules and things that you can get bogged down in, you have a tendency to lose that storytelling in it. And so I've really liked the simplicity of it that allows for that storytelling. But to your point, I think there are subclasses like the Battle Master that take a lot of crunchiness. I've always wanted to play a Battle Master that, like, if you're in it for the numbers and you're in it for the rules and you're in it for the, like, I'm here for the crunch squattiness of it all, there are subclasses that really lend itself to you having to be fully engaged all the time and be thinking critically and be thinking about all these different things. Or if you're just here to hit stuff, the champion's pretty good too.
Yeah, it's often said in creative circles, in artistic fields, that there is a certain freedom that comes from constraint.
Yeah.
That when you put restrictions on yourself, it makes you think more creatively. And I'm definitely on record in the past as saying that I prefer to play spellcasters because they're more versatile. Mm-hmm. But what I found with Ataraxia is because I placed a limitation on myself of he's a support character. Even though bards do have a lot of spells that can do a lot of damage, that's not who Ataraxia is. And so that does, in moments, even though I may kind of like get a little flustered over my lack of ability to do as much, damage as my friends are doing, it does make me think a little bit more critically, a little bit more creatively about how I can make the most of that action economy and contribute meaningfully to the story.
I think we have a good table for that. I think that can be a really hard balance to strike. And I feel like we've come to a lot of really good players that are able to think creatively and to create interesting situations that I like to hit hard. I like to create characters that do a lot of damage. So I really appreciate that you are a character and you tend to play characters that are like, I'm just going to be support and healing and I'm going to find really interesting ways to do things with that. Whereas I fear that if I were to play that kind of character, I think I would get very frustrated with it. The idea of like, I can't do any damage. I guess I'm just doing this. And you take it so gracefully and you're so good at it because you like to do it. And I love that. I feel like we have a really good balance at our table of we all kind of get to do things that we like to do.
Yeah, it's all about setting up your friends for success. One person cuts off the goat's head and the other person sprays the blood all over the place.
And then we take the goat head home.
Yep. Oh, boy. Well, any other final thoughts about the fighter before we wrap this one up?
I don't think so. I really enjoyed playing the fighter. I think in my brain, I kind of think of a fighter being more of a tank, and I confuse it. I kind of flip it in my brain with like the cleric, and I think the cleric is more magical, whereas like a cleric's a really good tank, and the fighter is really a DPS character. And I've not played a lot of DPS. I usually play tank, and so I've really liked playing a damage per second, a DPS character. Not a high armor class, but does a lot of damage really quickly. And I have really enjoyed playing a DPS character. Although I'm like itching for a subclass. So if you listen to this and you feel like the fighter needs a subclass, or not a subclass, a multi-class, you guys, you go ahead and let me know what multi-class I need to add to this fighter. But it's honestly the fighter's so vast that it almost doesn't feel like I need it, a multi-class with it.
Yeah, we'll see what happens if Thomas ever lets us level up again. All right. Well, everybody out there in podcast world, thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of I Cast Fireball. We hope you've enjoyed listening as much as we have enjoyed just geeking out over this wonderful class that has a lot more depth than there may seem to be on the surface. Now, from wherever you get your podcast, dear listener, we would encourage you to please leave us a review. It helps to boost our ratings throughout each podcast service, puts our show in other people's recommended feeds. It lets us know you like what we're doing, and we do have a wonderful, lovely DM who loves to shout out these reviews during the outro for our episodes. So if you want to get shouted out on the feed, that is a good way to get that done. And another good way to get shouted out on the feed and to write us something maybe a little bit longer than a review is to email us at icastfireball2020@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you all there. It always warms our hearts to see all of the fun messages coming through there. Everybody gets a chance to read them, and we're hoping that we can get the word out there and set this podcast on fire. Now, if you would like to get to the most recent up-to-date content from all of us here, we've got social media. We're on Instagram. We're on X. We've got the handle iCastFireball20. Mickey is the one who is posting the memes and the stories these days. So if you want to see
stories.
some of those,
I'm not as good at the memes as Jake is, and that's really intimidating to me. But when I find something funny on the stories, I'm like, I'm going to go post that on the iCast Fireball stories.
Yeah, if you want some nice, just fun, relatable D&D stories, then go follow us over there. And you can also get possible sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, some interesting insight from the players in DM, and behind-the-scenes shots of us making this incredibly fun world. Another great way to get all of that is through our Patreon Discord, where you can join at our $5 a month tier at patreon.com/iCastFireball20, and you can get in with all of the people in the spoiler zone who are taking minute-by-minute notes of what they think of the episodes as they come out, and lots of fun stuff going on there. Very fun little community. At this point, it's my turn to make a shout-out for my own podcast, which still feels weird.
But you deserve it.
Oh, thank you. Maybe I will have some character growth and eventually feel okay with self-promotion. So this podcast is called Improv Tabletop, and I'm the GM over there, and Thomas is also a regular on that show. One of the more recent campaigns that we've done over there, Jumanji Falls, has been super, super fun. It's Jumanji mixed with Gravity Falls. That one has Thomas and also our guest players, Caleb and Heather, who were brick and mortar in our first campaign.
Yeah.
And the three of them play a very dysfunctional family that established so much interesting lore that we doubled the length of that campaign from what we normally do on Improv Tabletop. It's just wonderful. Some of my favorite episodes that we've ever recorded. So go check that out. Jumanji Falls, a delight and a half over there on Improv Tabletop. Now, lastly, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends and fellow wacky adventurers. But until next time, I have been Ned, your host for Crunch Squad, and I have been joined by
Mickey, and I play Ignis in our season 2 of Skulls and Shackles, and I play a fighter, hence the fighter episode.
And maybe you should too.
Maybe you should too.
Keep the fire going, everybody, and we'll see you next time.